Gentlemen, it's Tuesday, it's April 26th, it's 2011, and this is Day 9 Daily number 294, and it's Newbie Tuesday, where we help the nudes, we help our nudie brethren study StarCraft 2, because a lot of times, gosh, I just got out of the shower and I already have like the hair issues, but that's fine. We're going to sort that out. A lot of times, people step into SC2 without any of the 12 years of RTS experience that many folks who played Brood War Warcraft 3 have. So that's what Newbie Tuesday is for. And in today's Newbie Tuesday, because it is 2 vs 2 week, we're going to be looking at how to play as a non-Zerg team. I'm not going to see any more. We're going to go right into a game. Then we're going to do a little more intro. You've seen it. It's happened to you all the time. You get on the 2v2 ladders. You think, hey, I'll play a game. This should be fun. Oh, Tien. I'm not even going to say it. We have a Teran Zerg team on the left. We have a Protos team on the right. Okay, so you're the Protos team, and you just think, hey, you know what? I'll build a pylon. Pylons seem good. Build another pylon. Okay, we're going to go ahead and try to scout what our little opponents are doing. Shoo, Sauron in. Oh, he's getting a very early spawning pool. Wait a frickin' minute. And then we see that yacht. And little buddy, again, this is you. You're a Protos team. Yeah, you're going to maybe build your cybernetics core. Uh-oh, that Wallen's not so tight. No big deal. Going to build another pylon. And then what happens? The Zerglings arrive. Oh no, there's Zerglings at my front gate. Well, don't worry, my ally's going to come help. He's going to try to help me. Oh, it didn't work so well. And then, okay, we're sending yet another Zealot. We're really going to try. We're going to try to get up here. No, look out. The Marines are joining in. Wait a minute. While this Zerg was ruining our lives, the Teren had all the time in the world to build 3 barracks. Not a lot of barracks, just 3. But then we have this tragic thing occur. Blue and red tried to join together to fight against teal and purple. They fall in battle. We see that red trying to send more zealots forward, trying to participate, but every time he moves forward he has to do this little dance where he moves forward and then he has to like back off because it is just too tough. You guys ever had this happen to you? You ever had this happen to you? Right at the start of the game? Yeah, you ever had this happen to you? Because everyone has. Happened to everyone. Oh, look at little Mr. Stalker. He's going to try to participate, but too bad. Zerglings have speed upgrade already. Happens to everyone, right? And that is the topic of today's Newbie Tuesday. A lot of people are going to think, is the topic that everyone's a cheesing asshole in 2v2? Actually not. Interestingly, no, that is not the topic for today. In fact, what we're going to be looking at is how to play as a non-Zerg team. That is, as a Protos, Teren, or Protos Teren, against any team that does involve a Zerg player. Because here's the real issue with a Zerg team, is that it all comes down to this concept that we love to call map control. One of the most important concepts in any strategy game, in particular the StarCraft and StarCraft 2 games. The idea of map control, I was actually thinking of the best definition possible before we ended up beginning the daily, and I think that I have stumbled across the correct definition of map control. This is what map control is, for any of you who have never heard this. It's a little bit abstract, but I think we're going to be good. Map control is the following. If at any point in time, you can say to your opponents, I'm sending 5 workers to the middle of the map, and then you can pick 5 workers and just send them to the middle of the map and they can return home safely, then you have map control, right? If there's nothing that they can do about that, then you have map control. Because a lot of times people will say it's the fastest army, it's the biggest army, it's, you know, the army that flies, all this junk. It can be a little different in some situations. Let's just talk about 1v1 map control first. Let's not even think about all the compositions of races that can go on. Let's think about 1v1 map control. Have you ever been up against a Zerg who has a ton of mutalisks flying around all over the place? Oh god, you could never send 5 workers to the middle of the map. You have to stay back, you have to protect yourself. Or if Zerg has a ton of speed Zerglings in the middle of the map, you cannot send 5 Zerglings out because they'll simply snipe those off and run right on back. So then someone might be like, oh, well, it's all about having the fastest set of units out there. Well, sometimes no. There was a very, very cool game that we saw at the Intel Extreme Masters Championship in Hanover between Squirtle and Moon, where Moon had a really huge army of Hydralisks. But Squirtle was just positioning force fields. Squirtle was not about to die, but he was just trying to throw some force fields up so that way he could stay alive. But the fact of the matter is that if Squirtle just engaged that army directly, he would straight up lose because the Hydralisk army was just bigger. Now, Hydras are not fast by any means, ever, because this isn't StarCraft 1, this is StarCraft 2 where your Hydras are slow as mud. However, it's still important to note that because because Moon had that huge amount of Hydralisks out there, he absolutely had map control. And that is the important thing to begin all the discussions today. We're talking about teams that have a Zerg in them. And let me add one brief thing to my notes here. Let's do the, the very cool Hellion Stalker game. Yes, we're going to be actually looking at a game that we looked at on Sunday, because again, it all comes back to this idea of map control. So when we think about map control, Zerg are always going to be the team that gets map control kind of early on. And I want you to think of map control as a resource that is similar to the other resources in the game. If you take a very early gas geyser, then you are going to have a lot of gas. If you get a very fast orbital command for mules, you're going to have a lot of minerals. And if you build a really fast spawning pool, you're going to have a lot of map control. Think of it in that way. And the reason we're going to use that is that later on, you've always seen yourself say things like, oh yeah, this is a sort of build where I'm going to be low on minerals, but it's okay because I have so much gas. We want to be able to talk in that same sort of language. Oh my gosh, I don't have any map control, but I have a really, really, really well-saturated set of minerals, or I have really, really good tech structures already established. These kinds of things. So with a Zerg, because the Zerglings are the fastest units early on, they can immediately gain a ton of map control. That's actually what we saw in this opening game. It wasn't that the players were being cheesy and bullshitty and, oh, they just made Zerglings and Marines. Ugh, I hate against cheesers. It actually was the Zerg player coming out with Zerglings, splitting up the Protoss, because Protoss units are initially slow, so they can't really get any map control. And then, once he had map control, joined his army together with his Teren buddy, and they just punished each player one at a time. Even though they were still fighting at that choke, ooh, he was fighting one zealot over here, fighting one zealot over here, fighting one zealot over here. Let's take a look at a pretty simple example game so that we have a sense of map control. Very, very simple, straightforward game, and anytime the opponents have map control, it means you are feeling scared. Here's Gustus, the Protoss player. Here's Sidonus, the Protoss player. They are a team. They are the submitters today, saying something in a language that I do not speak, with the exception of GSL, one of my favorite languages. We have Zrist, the Zerg player, and Wakes. Now, what we're going to see is not anything particularly extraordinary coming out of this Zerg Protoss team up here. This Protoss team is going to be doing something kind of standard. I will note they're going to be doing a mutual wall off at the front. That's good. Very, very important. Because I would like to note that the distance between this ramp and this ramp, for 2v2 purposes, is huge! That's a big distance in a 2v2. From here, oh my god, all the way to here in a 2v2 when you're up against Zerglings, they can easily just surround that one zealot, kill it off in 1 second, and run away. Yeah, that's a big damn distance, right? We're going to see another example of that after this, but we're going to see here still. They're going to be building their gateways in the middle. Nice little tiny constriction here. There's actually a hole there, but they're just going to close that off. Or maybe there's not. I don't know. I do know that they end up closing it off. And we're seeing Zrist do a fairly typical opening where he just kind of got a early spawning pool. Notice I didn't say 10 pool, or 6 pool, or 13 pool, or 14 pool, or 12 pool with a funky timed gas. It's an early pool, because that is about as much info as you need to understand this concept of map control, right? I want to completely disregard all specifics. When you're up against a Zerg with map control, we're going to see how careful you have to be. So here we see there's a whole lot of chrono boosts going on, all sorts of good jazz. Sidonus and his opponent, or excuse me, and his ally, both getting these warp gates very, very quickly. Now I want to come here and just note the difference between looking at team number 1, look at the mini-map, and then we come over here to the other team, and look, complete and total control of everything. Even Zerg going crazy and expanding over here might seem weird, but hell, he has map control. There's no reason he's not allowed to do that. So we are going to come right back here. And see, here is the key moment. You cannot walk out into the middle of the map if you do not have map control. And then this is a fairly typical experience that a lot of players are going to end up seeing. Oh no, oh my gosh, how did we get our front broken? If we just look at the mini-map right now, we see that there's some red dots in the middle of the map. These guys are not helping. Everything in Gustus's main is taking some serious hurt. And this is fairly typical Jazz. But what I would also like to note is that often when people are in this circumstance, they get this feeling of, oh my gosh, we just lost the game. Now, honestly, this is a completely avoidable error, and it would obviously be better if you did not let this happen. However, I would like to note the following. If we actually go to the resource station, and we come over here to the Zerg player in the Everyone screen, we see that Zerg really does not have much. He's trying to get some Zerglings out. He has like a small paltry force of Lings over here, but I mean, look at Zerg! 10 Zerglings! That's it. That's basically all he has. He's going to be, how much is in production? 6 Zerglings? Yeah, because I want to think of this as a resource. Zerg spend so much on map control early on that he's going to be low on minerals and he's going to be low on gas. You say that in the exact same way that you would describe other resources. Oh my gosh, if I get 2 geysers really fast, I get a lot of gas, but I don't get so many minerals. That's the trade-off that you're going to end up making. And that is the most important thing to think about when you're up against a Zerg, is that whenever he's spending a lot on map control, in a very simple sense, he's sacrificing a strong army. That's what he's sacking. Because map control is a very expensive resource to have control over when you do this sort of Zergling. So despite the fact that blue and red took an absolute beating at the start of the game, and despite the fact that, you know, this beating happened because, hell, he moved a couple of guys here. Not that far that it would seem, but in 2v2, a distance from here to here is huge. Zergling counterattack punished that. Right? So despite all this damage, they're going to come up, and it's going to be an extremely close fight, right? They managed to get all the way up into the Zerg main. A couple of units actually get left behind down here. This ends up being a lot closer than it ordinarily would be. I mean, Wakes is the only reason that Zerg's alive. Zerg basically has nothing. I mean, he doesn't even really have that many drones mining over here. That is the important thing to note. So, I want to just briefly, before we really step into that other game, before we step into like a more general sense of how you deal with this, I want to take one more look at this idea of Zerg having way more map control and why distances feel big. We have Slappy and Leomuda, the enemy. We have Mephisto. We have Hatshuzubi. They are a Protoss team. And again, this is on Kadarin depth. The distance from here to here seems so short, but in 2v2 this becomes huge. We're going to go just to the vision of the Protosses, who are now sending out some scouts. We're seeing a little probe come in here. Holy crap, the pool's done already. Oh my gosh, and there's something going down, a Roach Warren. Oh, that's a fast Roach Warren. Well, my Cybernetics core is not even really done yet. Oh my gosh, there's Zerglings already out for Slappy. And now, I want you to just look at how uncomfortable this feels for the Protoss players. Could they join their Zealots together here? Well, no, because there's going to be 2 Zealots against 12 Zerglings. So we're seeing them both play very, very carefully. 1 Zealot here. Okay, 1 Zealot here. Getting a robotics facility, why? Well, you know, we saw a Roach Warren. That seems like a pretty reasonable decision from our point of view. And this is scary time. Notice we're not seeing anything. We're going to see Warp Gate get started from Mephisto whenever he ends up remembering it. Lols. But I mean, this is a very scary period of time for any 2v2 team who's up against a double Zerg. Because they don't have map control. Even this is really risky. What if Zerg walks up here, sees these 2 Zealots, and just picks them off? We can actually see that there's a Zergling right here from Slappy. But this is a very icky spot to be in as Protoss. That's why these distances are so big. So what have we done thus far? We've established that map control is really what makes Zerg so scary in 2v2. Because when you have map control, it means I and my ally have the ability to join our armies together. And there's a couple other things that I want to note again, continuing this idea that map control is expensive, because I want to break down this idea that if a lot of damage is dealt early on, that you're somehow screwed. Ugh. Because that happens a lot. There's a ton of games in 2v2 where one ally ends up taking a real beating because there's these two opponents who are both doing very map control, expensive builds. And then both players leave, and it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? Ugh. We're going to take a look at a game that's just like that coming down the pipeline. But I want to note that, ooh, these guys were really scared. No engagement really ended up happening. And what we want to note is that these Zerg players don't really have any extra bases. They're both one basing it up right now. Spore Crawler might seem a little bit excessive, but we're actually going to see that the Stargate units are coming out pretty soon here, so the timing's actually fine. We're going to see that these Zergs don't actually have that much stuff. I mean, if we look at the resource station, we see that these two players, the purple and the teal, are not really that far behind Zerg. And in fact, the only reason they're really that far behind is because they're both teching like crazy. Again, this silly little spending tab that I don't actually think is that important. You're going to notice that the technology tabs are always going to be a little bit higher when you're not going for any sort of map control style build. So what we're going to end up seeing in this game's going to end up looking mildly funky because the caliber of play is not ultra through the roof. These players, I believe they label themselves as Gold League players. The important thing to note, though, throughout all this is that these Zergs, though, are going to be relatively low on tech, and we're going to see a kind of crisis end up coming up in a moment. We see an expansion come out. Again, not the most perfect placement. This game is still going to be an excellent illustration of how safe you really kind of end up being when you're up against this sort of crazy, big map control style Zerg. So, question is, how do we deal with these Zerg players who are holding themselves together? The answer is that we want to treat it like this resource and just say, what other resource do we have an advantage in? So, for instance, if my opponents do some sort of double 10 pool, they have a lot of map control, they don't have any economy. So, what I can do is I can go for a delayed 3 or 4 warp gate attack with my ally. We don't move out very early on, but we are going to eventually move out with a really huge force. We're only going to join our armies together once we have huge forces. Another really good thing to do is to just go air. This is something that I talked about on Sunday. Look at this. We are seeing McFisto. Look, he's just going to go air. Why is this? Because this Zerg player actually only just finished up this layer. This Zerg player cannot both have a lot of units and do a lot of tech and get a whole bunch of expansions up with a huge amount of saturation. I mean, look, he really does not have very much for the point of the game that we are at. Ideally, you'd like these a little faster. Again, this is not tip-top master level play where the timings are going to be super crisp. We're going to see some fancy lifting going on. What can these Zerg players do about this? Nothing. They have very, very low-tech units. They're just sitting at roaches. Meanwhile, we have like Colossi out on the field. Oh my goodness, what a tragedy. We see that the red roach count is a little bit too high. And here coming up is a moment that normally what you're going to see happens a lot earlier in an average 2v2. In that first game that we saw Zergling Marine. We saw that join together and the pressure happened. In this game, it's happening a lot later with roaches and roaches. Still the same general idea. The players with the map control are going to be able to join their armies together a little more easily. So you either have to have some sort of incredibly strong defense, or you're going to have to do some sort of stepping around of it. So the incredibly strong defense could be something like having a huge amount of Colossus and Immortal here. That's kind of what this player's doing. He's going for just the general ability to defend. This player's just stepping all the way around it and just saying, yeah, I'm going to go for air. So what happens? McFisto's going to take a lot of damage. I'm actually going to go to the resource tab here for a moment. We're seeing that, oh yeah, it looks fairly even. Here's the bust that ends up happening. We're going to end up seeing some attempted big control that goes down by our purple Protos player. And this just looks pretty darn bad for McFisto, right? This looks really ugly. I've intentionally removed this display tab. Oh my gosh, the accounting station, we see there's like 4 probes. Oh, how tragic. But we do end up barely defending this. Oh my goodness, it just feels so close. Come on, Colossi. Come on, you guys. Oh, Mentor Colossus, please. All right, looks like he's going to end up letting it stay alive. Now, I want you to relate what you just saw back to your 2v2 games. I want you to think of a game that was like that. Your ally wasn't dead. He didn't get completely killed, but they came in with a lot of units and did a good amount of damage. Ugh. Ooh. Oh. What now? Most of the time, when you ask people what position are they in, they'll say, well, I'm behind. My ally's dead, right? They did so much damage to him. I mean, hell, look at the unit counting station. He has 7 probes and a Phoenix. Looks like he ended up doing a little bit of suicidal action with his Phoenix, but, you know, he may have had a couple more. But I want to come back to this resource tab. What we're seeing is very common in 2v2. The 2 players who went for map control are going to be kind of low on food, or kind of middle-ish on food. And the other 2 players are going to be, one is way low and the other is way high. This will be more extreme the better the players are going to end up being. This player will end up being much, much, much higher. So I want you to note that right now, let's look at the bases. This is a moment in 2v2s where you need to spend so much time. So much frickin' time just going through this part again and again and just reassuring yourself that you're not that far behind. Zerg, red, 1 base. That's it. Blue, 2 bases. Sure, he has a gold, but he doesn't have any drones mining here. His second queen isn't even done. He only just now has this roach tech. Yeah, he doesn't even have any upgrades. They're low. You're up against roach hydra on like almost 3 bases? Have you guys ever played a 1v1 before? Yeah, a Protoss who's on 2 bases is going to be pretty comfortable with a Roach Hydra Ing Zerg on 2.5 bases, especially when that player doesn't really have that many upgrades. This is the most important moment for any of you struggling against a Zerg team, or any team that's doing crazy map control antics. There's a point where, holy shit, the players that did the map control stuff, because map control is such a costly thing to do, they couldn't possibly cope with all the Phoenixes and all the crazy techness going on, and they're going to have to just fall slowly more and more behind. Now, our purple Protoss, again, is not the smoothest Protoss in the universe, but he is actually going to be looking quite good. The red and blue players suddenly are in a little bit of a scramble. They still have map control, so they can still do a little bit more free expanding. McFisto's getting a little overeager taking that thing. I'm kind of glad that ended up getting canceled because, hey, we have an ally who's starting to get a decent amount of Void Rays up. And we're starting to see that this Protoss team, because they were valuing tech and resources instead of map control, again in my goofy little technology tab, in my spending, holy cow, look at the tech that we see for purple. It's really, really high ahead. Because they were doing that, they're going to get a bigger and bigger death ball. And that brings us to the second big important point. The first one is that Zerg are really good with map control. They can easily seize map control. But the second most important point is that Zerg do not have a good death ball in 2v2. They really don't. Broodlords are pretty good, but, you know, let's just move those aside for a moment. It's kind of hard to get to the death ball phase with Zerg. You're kind of in this like Roach Hydra-ing, Muta-ing phase, and you kind of have to... they don't really have a good death ball. So, we're going to see that this Protoss team is going to be very, very comfortable. We're going to go ahead and speed this up really fast. We're going to go ahead and speed this up. Boom. Oh my gosh, look at the roaches. Oh, not doing quite so much damage, but looks like did end up repelling it. Again, it's not, I didn't say it would be easy for the Protosses, and again, we'd like to reemphasize that this is not the highest caliber of play in the known universe, but what we will slowly end up seeing is that these Zerg players, despite having such insane map control, look at them slowly getting more and more map control. Oh my goodness. We're seeing McFisto and his buddy begin to get the Army of Doom. Oh my goodness, we cleaned that up. Wasn't that cool? In the resource counting station, we still see that there's this general same theme of the map control players being kind of middle-ish, then the player who got battered early on being low, and then the player who didn't get battered early on being high. This is very, very common. Speeding things right along. You know what? I figured that there's no real need to beat this to death. I will just tell you that this death ball ends up being so big that eventually they just attack the Zerg team and win. Ha-ha! How great was that? I figure all of you have watched many of games of Idra in many tournaments where you can easily see a death ball for Protoss performing well against Zerg. And I don't say that because Idra's bad. I say that because, incidentally, that's the way he's lost. It's the only way he ends up losing his games as of late. So I'm going to move on to a couple more examples of this. Holy crap, maybe we're not dead. Holy goodness, let me actually, I think this is it. Yeah, we're going to blast through this game. I just said that there was this ultra important moment where a bunch of players who are going for map control are actually in not that good a shape. And this is going to be one of the most comically extreme examples of this. We have Jacked X, who's going to die really soon because he's not walling in. Lol. We're going to see Nose-Nose-All. Over here is a Teren, and we're going to see a very early pool from Hack Zerg Tech, and we're going to see a very early pool from Zorn. Oh no, it looks like he has Azealot. How will you end up faring? Jack X, how will you end up faring? Alright, we're going to see he's not going to fare so well. The force field didn't work so nicely. Oh my gosh, look at him freaking out. We even see that Nose-Nose-All going to try to do some sort of fancy Hellionness, maybe to try to support, but no, in reality his opponent is going to die. How are we doing on time? We've spent about 1 minute on this game, blasting right on through it. And we're going to see Zorn now. Oh yes, they both have their expansions. But all of a sudden, I want you to pause right here. We have a Banshee out for Nose-Nose-All. Now look over at our Zerg players who did their costly map control style early on. Not that many drones. 1 queen. An expansion with no second queen. Very few drones. Almost no drones for Zorn. Come down here. Almost. Actually, this is pretty good. This is a pretty decent looking base, but nothing mining the gas on this one. And 2 queens. And then all of a sudden, they're going to see a Banshee. Come on, Nose-Nose-All. You're going to build a Banshee? Yeah, look at this. Zorn, he's going to have to build some Spore Crawlers. Going to have to build a Spore Crawler. What are you going to do, Hack Zerg Tech? Well, you're going to have to build a Evolution Chamber and get some freaking Spore Crawlers up. Look at the resource station. Again, extreme. You see? Middle-ish food counts, 33 and 48. Really high, the player who didn't get hurt early on. Really low. This is the most important moment when you're up against a Zerg team, or a map control team in general, which is typically going to be a Zerg team, and they start putting pressure on you. You need to say to yourself, that is okay. That is going to be absolutely A-okay fine. And interestingly, I'm actually going to remove this little overlay. This is a long game. This ends up being quite a long game. No, I do not want to print that screen. Thank you, computer. This Teren player, we're actually going to zoom ahead just a little bit. We're going to zoom ahead for just a bit. And in terms of good crisis management, we see that Jacked X did in fact send his ally a good bit of money. We're seeing all the Banshee-ness trying to, help him stay alive. And, notice that I was at ×8 for a long freaking time. I was at ×8 from like the 7-minute mark to now the 13-minute mark. And look at this. 28 drones, 34 drones. Nothing. Very few units for blue. Very few units for red. There's actually a reasonably sized window for blue to end up stepping in here and doing some pushing damage. Pretty sure the Zergs end up taking the win here, if I recall this game correctly, because when you have a lot of map control, you want to abuse that by taking more expansions, such as this way. You want to do more sorts of harassment like this. This is going to be good stuff. But again, I wanted to kind of note that there was a window where Nose-Nose-All could do quite a bit of damage. Quite a good bit. What we're going to end up looking at right now is we're going to look at a game, I believe it is on Redstone Gulch, there we go, where we're going to see what I would call a very reasonable way to play out a 2v2 where you are worried that one of your buddies is going to get 2v1'd. What we've sort of established so far is that map control, you kind of have to accept that Zerg's going to have that. We've also seen that it costs Zerg quite a bit in other dimensions of his play. So here are the Teren buddies, Lucy and 13XIII. What do we hate about this map? Well, first of all, this player here has this gigantic backdoor ramp. This is a huge backdoor ramp. And also he has a huge front door ramp. It just sucks to be in the position that we're going to see 13 in. So what do we see from Mr. X? We see an extremely early pool. And we're going to see Flash, who no doubt is the real KTF Flash. Going to be building a double barracks play. And now the problem with Lucy's position is that he cannot help his ally no matter what, like at all. His ally is just doing his own thing. So what happens from 13? He sees that Zerglings, my god, they're coming. So he is actually going to barely wall himself off in time. I would actually suggest that this first barracks ends up going down here pretty much always. But this is a pretty extreme response from 13, getting 2 barracks at his front. He's now going to try to begin teching up. And all of a sudden, he's going to go, oh my gosh, there's Zerglings at my backdoor ramp. And we're going to see, again, an extreme response from 13. This is him going a little bit crazy. Now, I'd like to note that really he shouldn't have built these 2 geysers. This was just a pinch too early. But we are going to see some depots go down. He's building like way too many depots. He has like none mining. And if we come to the resource tab, we're noticing, yeah, you know, Red's a little bit behind. He actually was being a little bit extreme. But in a sense, this is actually okay. If you are a team that is going to have a huge amount of trouble joining your armies together, such as a Teran team, if you're going to have that huge amount of trouble, you both have to try to defend yourselves really, 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 really hard. So doing something extreme, like building 3 or 4 bunkers, that's actually okay. If you don't forget your supply depot like Red did, you're going to be in a little bit of a better position. You're going to be in actually a lot of a better position. But again, this is this whole map control problem coming on up. But interestingly, what we're going to see from this moment in the game is a sort of extended, continued version of what we did before, where before we were talking all about how, oh yeah, Zerg, who does all this map control stuff, he's really not going to have that much. Look at this. Expansion, but nothing edit. Main with no real tech. Well, you know what? Because our purple player also went for this crazy all-endedness, he's actually also going to be a little bit behind as well. And what you got to do when you are in Red's position is you just got to send all your money to Blue immediately. Because look at Blue. He already is almost done with his stim. He has medevacs up. If Red sends all the money to the opponent right away, he's going to be in really, really, really good shape. Look at this. Doing all sorts of fun damage. This is exactly what you want to do. It doesn't have to be a medevac drop. It could be Banshees with Cloak. It could be Void Rays doing some sort of crazy harassment. Any and all of that is going to be totally, unbelievably kick-ass. Again, note this for the millionth, billionth time. Zerg is not going to be very far ahead in any regard because he did so much sacrificing of the economy. Yeah. Because map control is so unbelievably freaking gosh darn important. So what Lucy is doing right here is actually a very, very smart play. He's doing all sorts of fun harassment, and what can Zerg do about this? Well, really nothing, because, I mean, there's no... I mean, how often do you get this kind of freedom to move your medevacs around? Like, pretty freaking rarely. But we're seeing Lucy just pretty much mass up a huge amount of stuff. We're seeing Red, again, irresponsibly not sending his ally that money. I mean, what are you really going to do with these 3 barracks? Be much better spent on your ally. Oh my goodness, more dropping antics all over the place. What are we seeing? We're seeing the player who stayed alive, who didn't get hurt early on, doing way better in the food count. And this is actually a little bit of an optical illusion for Teal. He's not actually that far ahead in food because these roaches cost such a ridiculous amount of food that they end up skewing everything. We're going to see Lucy end up doing some continued awesomeness. These barracks should be used to scout, by the way. And it's kind of interesting to note how on the back foot Purple and Teal are, which is pretty typical of this sort of position in a game. So what I actually want to do is I actually want to revert back to a game that we ended up watching on Sunday. Because on Newbie Tuesday I asked for a lot of people struggling, there were a lot of games of people just getting smashed early on, but what we did not get the chance to see is people, how a game really ends up playing out, how this map control ends up coming in. Where is it? Where is it? It's the game with Solaris. Where are you, Solaris? There it is. This is a stunningly excellent illustration of how a 2v2 normally goes in terms of this battling for map control. We actually have 2 Zergs in here, but what we're going to see is a similar amount of concepts end up popping on in. So we're going to see the early 10 pool. This is the same game that we saw, early 10 pool, both going for map control. This entire game is going to be a battle for map control. It's less about unit compositions and honestly much more about map control, because hell, on this map, distance from here to here is gigantic. That's like the size of the cosmos between those 2 bases. That's like appallingly big. That is just gigantic. So, oh my gosh, Zerglings. Both of them sort of battling for map control. Again, who has map control? Can either player say, I'm sending Zerglings to the middle of the map, and can the opponent do anything about it? Well, actually, both of them can kind of do something about it. So really, no one has map control. It's kind of being contested. And then the Hellions going to continue to try to help with that, because map control is so frickin' gosh darned important. And we're going to see the same general theme of the Zerg players being crippled, because both of them are trying to gun so hard to try to stay in the frickin' game. Look at Carlos making more Zerglings, Purple making more Zerglings. Stalkers, fast unit. Hellions, fast unit. Good map control units. But what really ends up occurring in this kind of game is that I'm actually going to open up my fun, fancy little tech tab. What was I pointing out again and again and again and again? If you end up losing a whole bunch of stuff early, if one of your players ends up dying, you can try, as the player who stays alive, to be way ahead in the technology tab and just get, honestly, the Death Ball style army. So for Protoss, this would be going for like the Colossus with gateway units, Death Ball. Because if you do that, you're going to be up against 2 players, both of whom are going Roach Zergling. Looks good for you. Or in this game, we're going to end up seeing the Teren player go for a huge mech play. And it's kind of funny to see how this ends up having a gigantic impact. More Stalkers, more Stalkers. Here's the battle for map control going on. Nothing is really going to change in the early game stages until one player gets map control. Everything is going to be about map control. So we're going to see these battles. We're going to see all this fancy funness go on. Oh my goodness, does any player have definitive map control yet? I don't really know. Holy cow. And what's going to end up being the turning point in this game is when that map control kind of drops off the radar. When all of a sudden it's clear that one team just kind of has more stuff. Ooh, that's going to be a little dangerous. And then, what happens when one team loses map control? Well, what happens is this guy is just going to be dead. He's going to completely die, and this player is going to have to step forward. In a sense, when you don't have a Zerg player on your team, when you're just like Teran Protos, Protos, or Teren, in a sense, you are giving up map control at second 0. You're going, oh, I totally, it's all yours, man. It's all yours. But still, in this game, where the map control ends up being given up at like the 10-minute mark, still same overall, good junk, good jazz, ends up popping out. Holy goodness, how great. Speeding things right along again, we're going to see that once the big invasion ends up coming in, yes, that is right, the bigger army from the Stalker player. Oh my goodness, we've just lost map control. Oh my gosh, so what happens? Big counterattacks if we go to our fancy technology tab. Yes, we're going to see that Solaris is going to be favoring the tech really hard, while this guy favors the counterattack. And it ends up being a pretty fun, cool game. Hip hip hooray. So what have we learned? What have we learned so far? Well, first we've learned that I cannot focus unless I have a pen in my hand. Yes, I gotta be able to do that little thumb twisteroo-ah, or I cannot focus. Yes. So if you are in a 2v2, what have we learned thus far? My brain decided to just leak completely out. This has been happening to me like 4 or 5 times a day now, where I'm mid-sentence and I just completely lose my frickin' train of thought. Okay, yeah, so we looked in the game that was on Redstone Gulch, where we had one player build 4 bunkers. That's actually okay to be that extreme on defense. The more extreme your opponents are being in trying to kill you, the more extreme you can be in terms of the defense. You can go crazy in the defense. And someone might ask, well, why is that okay? Because the more that they're trying to break you down and 2v1 you early on, the more they're spending on map control. And map control is very costly. It means we can't really have anything else. So sort of extreme responses are fine. It didn't end up working out because our buddy got supply blocked and had empty bunkers. Darn. But again, we've seen in many, many circumstances, even if one of your buddies dies, that's okay as long as both players are sort of going along a big tech upswing route. If one of you ends up taking a huge hit, the other player will make up for it. That game on Kedar in Depths where we saw a Protos team. One was going for the air with Phoenixes, the other was going for the Colossus, and the two Zergs were just making a bunch of roaches. The roaching players killed the player who was going for the big Void Ray stuff. But because the other player was going Colossus, their death ball ended up continuing to be scary. What about if the Colossus player had been attacked? Well, the one player who has a huge amount of air, then he's still going to be having the good part of that death ball. In one circumstance, they have a 5 Colossus, 2 Void Ray death ball. In the other circumstance, they have like an 8 Void Ray, 2 Colossus death ball. Either way, they end up with the death ball, and it's going to be in good shape. So what have we ended up seeing from players who have been losing in these games? It's that they're not being extreme enough in their defenses. That's really the big key. And again, just to reiterate, if you're not as extreme on defenses, it's still okay if you end up taking a pretty huge hit because if you're both going for this sort of tech path, then again, it's all about the death ball. But in some circumstances, the reason you lose to a Zerg has nothing to do with any of this map control business. That is probably a pretty darn important thing to consider. What we're going to see in this game, this actually is very much so not going to be about the map control problems that we will end up seeing. Comes up a little bit into play, but not as much, Almost every single game that we have discussed, it has been about map control. If you, actually the most previous game, we saw, oh, a good way to battle a Zerg who's going for map control is for you to also try to go for map control. Ling Hellion against Ling Stalker, both just trying to wrestle for control over the center of the map. But there's nothing wrong with abandoning it. By the way, that is one of the most comical misclicks of all time. Kubadro just cancels his barracks when it's at 99%. It happens. We're going to see from the Zerg player is there's a little bit of the fear going on by our two Teran players. You know, we don't really want to move out because there could be some Zerglings out there in the middle of the map. But the reason I'm not really that concerned about emphasizing map control here is that these two players are joined together. There's no split. Map control is most important in a 2v2 because of the whole splitting factor. So the fact that these two players already kind of have their mutual little wall off here, it's not really a big deal. They're going to get to do exactly what they want to do. Very, very easy stuff. Very, very easy stuff. Yeah, look, they're getting to tech. We see 2 orbital commands up. Oh, yeah. Oh, goody goodness. Hip, hip, hooray. We did not get messed with. We have made no hard decisions. We are just going to go with big mass Marine Marauder. How happy we be. Yep, picking off everything. Oh my goodness. How do we end up losing? Oh no, well, I'll give you a hint. It begins with B and ends with awesome. That is right, Banelings. It turns out quite effective against his Marine Marauder mixes. And he'll end up getting repelled. Now, a good question is, well, what's the frickin' problem? Why are these two Teran players, why are they losing? I mean, obviously they're not still dead. If we go to the resource tab, we see, whoa, actually doing quite good. Actually, both teams are doing pretty fine. I mean, look at this. 1 high, 1 low, 1 high, 1 low. Looks great. Looks like some good stuff. Some good stuff. Yes. Aquila. Very cool, very good. I'm going to speed things up just a little bit. Yeah. Looks like they are going to be taking the expansions, but what ends up happening sometimes is that you can get in this mode where you don't end up like transitioning at all. Both these players just sort of continuing to go Marine Marauder. And we're seeing that the the Proton Zerg team, yeah, is appropriately teching up to a very good mixture. This is less about the Zerg doing anything map control-y, because you know what, Banelings? These are not good at controlling the map, because Anytime you kill something, you lose all your banelings, and then you don't have any units anymore. They're good at crushing armies, right? But they're not good at sort of managing space in any sort of fancy regard. But we're still seeing this. It's actually the reverse theme that's going on with our two Teran players against the other players. In all the games we've looked at today, it's been the Zerg staying low-tech, aggressive. How do they end up losing? By the opponents going for higher tech, bigger, scarier armies, even though they might take some scary damage early on. That's the general theme that we end up seeing In this game, it's kind of funny. The Terens are the one going for this low-tech aggressive. We're going to go Marine Marauder into more Marine Marauder into more Marine Marauder. And suddenly, this Protoss player is saying, oh, yeah, well, if you do that, I'm going to be getting Speed Zealots. I'm going to be getting Colossus. The Protoss player is doing the higher tech stuff. Interestingly, it's kind of a little bit of a role reversal. That's because these two Teran buddies were actually the ones who were going for the big map control play. And anytime you go for map control, there's nothing wrong with doing some sort of big tech-style response. Now, the last replay I wanted to look at today is we've done a rapid-fire examination of a whole bunch of games where we start to realize, wow, the Zergs aren't really that far ahead. Where is this one game? It was on Scorched Haven. Where's the Scorched Haven game? Yes, here we go. Almost every single game has been a Zerg doing early pool and occasionally early roach. But basically early, I'm going to be scary. Well, let's go ahead and do a little bit of an interesting shift, but we're still going to see the same concept come in. Zerg's going to be expanding and going for Mutalisks, which again locks you down on map control. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with letting a Zerg have a bunch of Mutalisks running around. There's not much you can do to prevent him from doing that. But what we don't want to do is start making some crazy mistakes like running ourselves out into the middle of the map. That's what we saw in one of the first games. We run out into the middle of the map, we get punished. If we try to counterattack too early, we get punished. We just want to have a little bit more patience. Because my goodness, is it hard to do some sort of big map control and have an insanely good economy. So yeah, look, okay, Andy. And we see Schafsman, yes. We see Mutalisks popping out, looking to be in good shape. And this is a pretty common situation that happens in a lot of 2 vs 2s, where we see a Zerg player coming in, whoopsie daisies. A Zerg player moving in with a lot of Mutalisks. Oh, how problematic that's going to be. Let's take a look at the unit tab briefly. We have 5 Mutalisks. Excuse me. And we have 27 Marines from blue. Cool. From purple, we have 22 Marines. And we have a pretty big gateway army. But we also want to note that Farken's Marines have Stim and Combat Shield, whereas Blue's Marines have neither. In fact, they're just now finishing up Stim. In other words, the army for our purple-teal team is better than the army for our red-blue team. However, similar to everything we've looked at, the Zerg has this map control that's keeping everyone dancing, keeping everyone on their feet. Oh, how obnoxious that can be. We're going to have some turrets go down. And at this point, there's nothing wrong with playing quite patiently, especially if you can, have an observer go out, see, wow, yeah, he actually is making a lot of Mutalisks. What we're seeing Zero J do, and what we're seeing Teren do, I actually think is going to be pretty good as a series of decisions. Just going for a really big army, going to be going for this Colossus tech. I personally would say that the Protoss player would probably benefit from going for some sort of extreme response, like 2 Stargate Phoenixes, just to really kill off the Mutalisks, because honestly, the rest of everything for the Protoss is doing so well. And now we're seeing the Zerg slowly begin to get ahead. It's happening a little faster this game. But this sort of stuff, I'm not a fan of. Why would you not be a fan of this sort of business? Because the opponents have map control. Hell, we couldn't wander 5 workers out while we want to be trying to sacrifice a War Prism to move out there early on. Yeah, you know what? I really think Phoenixes are going to be a really, really good choice in this particular circumstance. If we go to our resource tab, we're seeing that here's the real problem with trying to do this little sort of trying to run around business. Oh gosh, how painful this is. We're actually seeing the Teren and the Zerg get way, way ahead because the map control is not really being battled in any sort of direct way. You cannot battle map control by like trying to do these little roundabout things. He's trying to be all sneaky and stuff. Very, very, very hard to do this sort of stuff. I actually did not end up watching through to the end of this game. I wanted to see how it ended up turning out. But from the Zerg's point of view, this is what always makes the Zerg a very strong player to have on your team, because Teren pretty much got to do whatever the heck he wanted. Hell, Zerg got to do whatever the heck he wanted. And when you're at this point in time, it's going to be a little rough. Dark Templar, I don't mind, but I really would be leery of doing any sort of, like, little teensy, you know, Warp Prism harass. That can be very, very expensive. Looks like the Mutalisk is going to go ahead and try to do a little bit of damage. Ain't going to work. And poor Protoss Teren did not quite get the chance to mass up their death ball. We're not seeing that many late tech units pop up from our purple buddy. But we are noticing the funny thing that always ends up happening. Look at this. Look at this frickin' technology tab. Way higher for the other two players. And that really is where your advantage is almost always going to lie. Is the fact that you can have a much higher tech, much awesomer army. So what we've looked at is like 15 different examples where we're seeing essentially the same thing come up again and again and again and again and again. Anytime you're going for some sort of huge map control play, whether it be crazy cheese, whether it be just a Zerg player doing some Zergling pressure early on, whether it be late game Mutalisk pressure, whether it be, you know, even if you're up against a Protoss Teren team and they're going proxy Marine Zealot, there's this really long, painful period after you've done all your fancy aggression where you can't really do anything. Where, as the player who battled for the map control so hard, you're kind of behind on economy and tech. And if you're the Protoss, the Protoss Teren, the Teren team, you can just go for some really big, high-tech stuff, go for even some extreme defenses in some circumstances, even some 1v2s in some circumstances, and that is quite normal, and you're going to be fine. I think the game on Kadar in Depths, where we had our Colossus Void Rain players, they ended up being up against a crazy Roach huge pressure play, but because they just had overall the stronger unit mix, in the recovery, they didn't actually need to worry about the fact that the players had the whole map. In fact, one of my favorite maps in 2v2 Discord 4 is one of the funniest instances of this, where you'll be up against a team that's going like Zerglings with Blink Stalker, like some crazy map control team. And if you just sit on your ass going like Phoenix, Void Ray, Tank, you are almost guaranteed to win. Even if they take the whole map and have huge amounts of stuff, the fact that you have the stronger Meteor army that can do the one slow big punch, you're going to be in good shape. Let's go ahead and take some brief questions. Markioa. Question script. Alright, let us see here. Let us start the capture request. Yeah, I love this question script. It is so cool. It is the coolest thing ever. Let us divine here. Avjord says, can you practice 2v2 builds as you as practice a 1v1 build? It seems that 2v2 is a bit too dynamic for that. You definitely can practice a lot of important stuff in 2v2. There's actually like a lot of builds that end up happening. I mean, in a sense, in your 1v1s, you have like a ton of variety that you end up dealing with. Like, if I just say something like, I want to do a 1 barracks early expand in Teren vs. Zerg. Well, what if he does an early pool? What if he, like, expands really fast? What if he techs to Mutalisk? What if he techs to Roaches? What if he techs to Banelings? What if he tries to do some sort of crazy Zergling with speed stuff? You have all these little variety situations that you end up in. But things start to eventually calm down. And in the midst of all that, you always do little things like, I better build some supply depots over here, so that way I can wall off the back of my entrance on Xel'Naga Caverns. I better build some supply depots here to help protect, against a Nidus Worm to spot that. It actually ends up feeling the same way in 2v2s, where you're like, all right, now's about the time I need to check the side of my base to see if he's going to do any sort of pylon, overlord, warp into my base, anything like that. Okay, yeah, now's about the time when I should probably scan him to see if he's, doing any sort of expanding right now. Oh, he's not doing that. Better be, like, ultra defensive. But the one thing that I would note that's always sort of cool about a 2v2 when compared to a 1v1 is that they both have this big practice element. But when you start dying in a 1v1, you leave the game because you're dead. When you start dying in a 2v2, sometimes your ally will save you. And he'll be still progressing along his build order as clear and bright as day. But you now are in this sort of funky, I guess I gotta just improvise. And I guess I gotta just sort of play ad lib. And the important thing is to note that you're not actually just like improving, you're not just sort of winging it. In reality, you're going to have the same sort of guiding principles as you should always have in your gameplay. Your game plan in both 1v1 and 2v2 should never be like, oh yeah, this is my build, this is what I do. It's always more important to have something like, I am trying to do an attack here with tanks that will kill off this expansion and never let them get that expansion. That's a guiding way to play Xel'Naga Caverns. And you can even have simple guiding principles like, don't forget probes, don't forget pylons, watch the minimap, try to get up a big Colossus army, do all this sorts of good jazz. So that's actually kind of fun practice for 1v1s. Here's an interesting statement from Frenzy54. It says, Dear Day 9, it seems to be so far in the 2v2 dailies that you are building a good case against the prevailing opinion that 2v2 can't be truly competitive. What do you think of the future of 2v2 in esports? Now, see, that's an interesting statement because I actually think I'm doing the opposite. That I think 2v2s are great and have a lot of really interesting competitive aspects to it that actually make it, in a lot of circumstances, you get to see more dynamic games than in 1v1s. The reason that I think it might feel that way, and the reason why I elected to take this question, is that so often people just think it's about goofy, garbagey cheese. Because they're not trying to... Because they have that 1v1 mindset. And what I'm trying to say is that there's a 2v2 mindset where you'll die and you as a team are still ahead. The individual player is screwed. In fact, all these games we looked at today have this theme of one player really dying. And I want to break this notion that these were comebacks or that the other players who ended up, killing one player somehow, oh yeah, they threw the game away. That is actually not the case. I do think that Zerg are probably going to be always an integral component of 2v2s. I think a lot of people are going to value always having a Zerg on the team. That was the case in Brood War in the 2v2 scene because, again, having that map control and because Mutalisks were really awesome back then. Now they suck. And yeah, I don't care if you're like, oh, they're really good units. Idra makes them and he upgrades them. They're not Brood War Mutalisks by any means at all. But I also think some of the maps are just horrible. That's one thing I think is always really going to hurt the 2v2. There's, like, for instance, I love Ruins of Tarsonis. I think that's like a cool map. You have these backdoor rocks, but then you also kind of have a mutual ramp, so you can work together, but you have a lot to worry about. But then there's a map like Gutter Hulk, where you're both really far away, and you both have back doors that are really far away. It's like impossible. Or Redstone Gulch, where like one player is just designed to get killed early on. Yeah, that's always something that I'm a little bit concerned about. But like maps like High Orbit, Discord 4 I like a lot. Discord 4 I actually think is a little bit too strong for mech. What other maps I like? I really like Ruins of Tarsonis. Gutter Hulk I just hate, and I refuse to downvote it. Scorched Haven I'm torn on. Traditionally I don't like that map. All right, let's take some more questions. Yeah. Let's see here. Oh yeah, here's an important theme I'm seeing in a lot of the chat is like, do you always have to die early on? No. That's also one thing that I specifically chose in these games to reveal, yeah, if one player does die, you can actually be in a great situation. And in some circumstances, what you'll see Teran and Protos teams do is do a kind of extreme defensive opening. So, like, for instance, you'll see, a Protos, like, on what the heck's that map called? you know, a Scorched Haven or Kadarin Depths or Gutter Hulk, where they'll both open with like 2 gateways, just to be able to get a good amount of zealots out, to be able to defend against any sort of goofiness, and to try to gently join together early on, but they're really both trying to go for some sort of tech. Or Teran players who will open up 2 barracks just to get enough Marines up to stay alive, and then go for a big factory play, or then go for Banshees or something like that. There's a lot of players who will do that sort of funness. Or you'll end up seeing some real extreme stuff, you know, where... I'm trying to think of some of the crazy fun stuff, where one player will just go absolute crazy, and the other player will be like ultra techy. Like a classic example is 6-pool Dark Templar is a really standard, like crazy play, because the 6-pooling player is such a gigantic threat to both of the 2 players early on that it buys this one player all the time in the world that needs to get DTs up. So being a little more comfortable with extremes, I guess, is a big important theme. I'm going to end the daily. I'm going to end it. I'm just going to go. I have to go to do state of the game. I have to go get food. I'm wrapping it up. Au revoir.